Is 2026 the year of World War III? Right now, military analysts are watching three flashpoints that could ignite a global conflict: Taiwan, Ukraine, the Middle East. And the timeline they're most concerned about isn't some distant future. It's 2026. The question isn't whether tensions are rising. Everyone can see that. The real question is why this specific year keeps appearing in classified briefings and think tank reports. What makes 2026 different from 2025 or 2027? Let's start with what's actually happening on the ground. In the South China Sea, Chinese warships conduct exercises every week that simulate blockading Taiwan. Not occasionally, every single week. The People's Liberation Army has ramped up military drills to a pace unseen, even during the 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis. Meanwhile, the United States just approved another $2 billion in arms sales to Taipei, and American troops are quietly rotating through Taiwanese bases. But here's what most people miss. This isn't just about Taiwan wanting independence or China asserting territorial claims. The island produces 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors. The chips in your phone, your car, military drones, AI systems. All of them trace back to factories in Hsinchu and Tainan. Whoever controls Taiwan controls the technological infrastructure of modern civilization. So when Xi Jinping tells his military to be ready for combat operations by 2027, he's not picking that date randomly. Now, shift west to Ukraine. The war that was supposed to last weeks has ground on for 3 years. Russia's economy is buckling under sanctions, but Putin keeps doubling down. Why? Because from Moscow's perspective, this isn't about Ukraine anymore. It's about whether NATO can expand right up to Russia's borders. It's about whether the post-Cold War order holds or collapses. And European defense ministers are starting to say the quiet part out loud. Germany just announced its largest military buildup since World War II. Poland is creating an army of 300,000 troops. France is talking about deploying forces to Ukraine if the situation deteriorates further. These aren't precautions. These are preparations. Then there's the Middle East, which has its own accelerating crisis. Iran is reportedly months away from weapons-grade uranium enrichment. Israel has made clear it will strike Iranian nuclear facilities before they cross that threshold. Saudi Arabia is exploring its own nuclear program. The powder keg doesn't need much of a spark. 3 separate conflicts, thousands of miles apart. But they're not separate anymore. Here's where it gets complicated. China is watching how the West responds to Russia in Ukraine. If NATO's support wavers, if Western resolve cracks, Beijing takes notes. That makes Taiwan more vulnerable. Simultaneously, if the US gets pulled into a conflict over Taiwan, its ability to support Ukraine diminishes. Russia knows this. They're coordinating. In February 2024, Putin and Xi declared a friendship with no limits. That wasn't diplomatic rhetoric. Russian oil flows to China at discounted rates, keeping both economies afloat despite sanctions. Chinese technology finds its way into Russian weapons systems. Iranian drones, built with Chinese components, strike Ukrainian cities. The alliances are forming. Not the formal treaty alliances of World War I, but something more fluid and equally dangerous. But we still haven't answered the core question. Why 2026? American intelligence agencies point to something called the Davidson Window, named after Admiral Philip Davidson, former head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. In 2021, he testified that China could attempt to take Taiwan by force within 6 years. That puts us at 2027. But military buildups don't happen overnight. If China wants to be ready by 2027, the decision points happen in 2026. There's another factor nobody talks about publicly, but everyone thinks about privately: the U.S. presidential election cycle. 2024 brings a new administration, probably. By 2026, that administration is midterm, potentially weakened, distracted by domestic politics. Historically, that's when adversaries test American resolve. And China's own internal pressures are mounting. Youth unemployment above 20%, a real estate sector in freefall, an aging population that will soon shrink the workforce. Xi needs a victory to consolidate power and distract from economic pain. Taiwan provides that victory. The pieces are moving into position right now. What happens next depends on decisions being made in Beijing, Moscow, Washington, and Tehran. Decisions that could transform 2026 from just another year into the year everything changed. So what does escalation actually look like? Not the Hollywood version, the real thing. It starts quietly. A Chinese Coast Guard vessel rams a Philippine supply ship. Taiwan reports unprecedented aerial incursions. Russian troops mass near the Estonian border for exercises that never quite end. Each incident alone means nothing. Together, they form a pattern. Then comes the miscalculation. Maybe a Taiwanese F-16 shoots down a Chinese drone that strayed too close. Maybe a Ukrainian strike hits a target inside Russia that Moscow can't ignore. Maybe an Iranian proxy attacks a US base in Iraq. The specific trigger matters less than what happens next. Here's the mechanism that terrifies defense planners. Modern militaries operate on something called escalate to de-escalate. The idea is simple. If you hit hard enough, fast enough, the other side backs down before things spiral. But it only works if one side blinks. If both sides are playing the same game, you don't get de-escalation. You get acceleration. China launches a blockade of Taiwan. Not an invasion yet. Just ships preventing anything from entering or leaving. They calculate the US won't risk war over a blockade, but Taiwan's economy collapses within weeks. Chip fabrication stops. Global supply chains seize up. Japan and South Korea face the choice: accept Chinese regional dominance or intervene. The US faces its own choice: honor defense commitments or abandon allies. Meanwhile, Russia sees American attention pivot to Asia. Ukrainian defenses suddenly receive less ammunition, fewer replacements, slower intelligence sharing. Moscow launches an offensive, not against Kyiv, against Odessa. Cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea entirely. European NATO members now face their nightmare scenario: fight Russia without full American backup, or watch Putin redraw borders by force. Iran picks this exact moment to sprint for a nuclear weapon. With American carrier groups deployed to the Pacific, Israeli strikes on Iranian facilities become harder to support. Tehran knows it. The calculation shifts. 3 simultaneous crises. The US military, powerful as it is, wasn't designed to fight peer adversaries on 3 fronts simultaneously. Choices have to be made. Those choices create opportunities. Adversaries exploit opportunities. But there's a scenario that's somehow worse than war: capitulation. The US decides Taiwan isn't worth fighting for. China achieves its objective without firing a shot. What happens then? Every American security guarantee becomes worthless overnight. South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, they all start cutting deals with Beijing. NATO members question whether Washington would actually defend Estonia if it wouldn't defend Taiwan. The alliance structure that prevented major war for 75 years dissolves. Not through defeat, through doubt. Russia presses further into Ukraine, possibly into Moldova. Iran becomes a nuclear threshold state. The global order doesn't collapse dramatically. It erodes. Then, suddenly, you're living in a different world. One where might makes right. Where borders are suggestions. Where treaties mean nothing. That's the 2026 question. Not whether war happens. Whether the systems designed to prevent war still function. Right now, we're testing those systems in real time. Every weapons shipment to Ukraine. Every diplomatic mission to Beijing. Every military exercise in the Pacific. These aren't just policy moves, they're signals. Communication between powers trying to avoid miscalculation while preparing for it. The terrifying part? Nobody actually wants World War III. Not Xi, not Putin, not Biden or whoever follows. But wars don't start because someone wants them. They start because someone miscalculates. Because deterrence fails. Because the other side's red line was somewhere different than you thought. History is full of wars nobody intended to fight. August 1914. Nobody wanted World War I. It happened anyway because the mobilization schedules once started couldn't be stopped. The alliances, once triggered, couldn't be untriggered. We have more sophisticated systems now, better communication, clearer doctrine. But we also have faster weapons, tighter timelines, more complex interdependencies. The question isn't whether 2026 brings war. It's whether it brings the decisions that make war inevitable. Those decisions are happening now, in classified briefings, in military procurement, in diplomatic cables. We'll know what they were only after it's too late to change them. So here's what we're actually looking at. Not certainty, but probability. Not inevitability, but trajectory. 2026 doesn't guarantee war. What it guarantees is consequence. The decisions being made right now in Beijing's Zhongnanhai compound, in the Pentagon's secure planning rooms, in Moscow's inner circles, those decisions close off options. They narrow the paths available. By 2026, we'll know whether deterrence held or whether someone blinked first. The optimistic view? Leaders recognize the stakes. They've seen what happened in 1914 and 1939. They understand that modern war between nuclear powers doesn't have winners, just different degrees of losing. Maybe that's enough. Maybe the fear of mutual destruction still works like it did throughout the Cold War. But there's a darker reading of the same facts. Every empire in decline faces the same temptation. Act now while you still can, or accept diminished status forever. China sees its window closing as demographics shift. Russia sees NATO expanding. The US sees its unipolar moment ending. When everyone believes time is running out, someone eventually jumps. What happens in 2026 depends on choices not yet made. But the options available in 2026 depend on choices being made right now. The military positioning, the alliance strengthening, the economic decoupling. We're not sleepwalking into conflict. We're walking into it with eyes open, each side convinced the other will back down first. History suggests that's usually when things go wrong.